Now, what I've done in a few of my experiments is that I took a Lego lunar module with an astronaut, right? Put him on an asphalt road. Now, I shot this during the day, because to get the the appropriate sunlight. But you see, when you're shooting this out in the day, you've got the sunlight being reflected through miles of air molecules, and subsequently the blue sky acts as a secondary light source. So I put this Lego model inside a cardboard box with one side cut out, to sort of shield it from the additional lighting from the blue sky, right?
Okay.
Now, I took some photographs, right, and it turns out that to accurately get the astronaut to be lit up, you'd have to open the aperture up all the way to f4, just to get him to be illuminated, on a surface with the same albedo. But at f4, it greatly overexposes the landscape. It just makes it a wash of bright light. It's just flooding the camera with this immense whiteness. That's how I can describe it. Right, and that never happened in any of the Apollo photos. You see the picture of Buzz Aldrin standing on the moon when he's in the lunar module shadow, lit up. The surface is still correctly exposed. He's brightly lit, but the only way to get him to be lit up without the aid of any fill lights or reflectors would be to increase the aperture all the way up to an enormously high aperture setting in f-stop, which greatly overexposes the landscape. Right. So given that the landscape isn't overexposed in any of these pictures, I'd say they're using either a much brighter surface, on their fake moon set, either using a much brighter surface, or they were using fill lighting.
Understood. And for the benefit of explaining to the audience who might not know what albedo is.
Okay, albedo is basically what we use to measure how much light is reflecting off a surface. Now, the albedo of the moon is about 7%. The albedo of the Earth is 35%, right? And the planets, they vary in albedo throughout the solar system. Like, I think Venus has an albedo of 80%. I don't know the other albedos of the other planets, but the moon's albedo is 7%, which is the same albedo as asphalt. Here on Earth. Like what they make the road out of, and that's pretty dark.
Right. So I mean, this is why I wanted to bring you here tonight, because I really needed, number one, if Mythbusters wanted to have done it correctly, it would have been impartial. Okay, so it would have brought someone in as a expert like yourself, so they could recreated the experiments under everyone's agreement that this was a test that was worth doing correctly, instead of just doing it and then saying, there it is, we've put it to rest, we're the end-all, be-all. And I just knew that there was more to the story there, and I wanted our listeners to know that. So for everybody listening out there, Mythbusters did not totally discount the moon hoax theories. Now,
if I may say something about you said if they would have brought in someone who should be an expert, they should have brought in someone who was an expert. Do you want to know who they brought in?
Yeah, no, go ahead. I don't.
They brought in Phil Plait and Jay Windley. Both men are pathological liars, plain and simple. Like Phil Plait, for example, he has the website badastronomy.com. He often runs around telling people that Bill Kaysing, the guy who first started the moon landing hoax movement, Bill Kaysing, the grandfather of the Apollo moon hoax theory, Plait, he often runs around claiming that Bill Kaysing said, any space travel is impossible. Well, hang on, there is no such statement by Bill Kaysing. Right? And I even asked him point blank, hey, where's this quotation from Bill Kaysing where he said any space travel is impossible? And Plait, he never returned my messages. He just ran away with his tail between his legs. So I can ultimately say that Plait is a liar, right? And they were bringing in these liars as their technical consultants, right? Now, at the end of the day, right, look, if you're trying to prove something that's legit, prove something that's real, like if you're trying to prove something that's undeniable, like, say, the Earth being round, you wouldn't have any need to lie about your opponents. Just explain why they're wrong and let it go, right? You wouldn't need to lie about them, say they said this, no, they said this, whatever, So they've got all these lies trying to protect the lies of NASA, basically.
It would seem so, and it's also been strange. A lot of things that's been coming out of Buzz Aldrin's mouth in the past week, it would seem. I don't know if you've had a chance to see a lot of this stuff, but it just seems as though there's been a lot of just strange, nervous banter coming out of these folks. Do you see what I'm talking about here at all?
Yeah, I saw what you're talking about. In fact, recently they were talking about how, oh, there's no need to go back to the moon. We've already been there. Go to Mars next. Hang on, why don't you want us to go to the moon? You know, we could probably use it as a launching platform. No, go to Mars. Don't go to the moon. You know, that's what basically Buzz Aldrin is saying now. You know, don't go back to the moon. Go all the way to Mars now.
Yeah,
well,
and then he
probably they don't want. They probably. Sorry.
I said then he throws out this weird statement about Phobos, which I'm sure you saw, that everyone claims, oh yeah, well we all knew about that for years. But the way that he said it was trying to dangle this carrot in front of everyone that there was some sort of basically, to me it seemed like he was trying to say there was an alien structure perhaps on Phobos. I'll go out on a limb.
Yeah, he's trying to lead them astray, basically.
Well, I wanted to get, what was current and get your opinion on that. But now let's take a breath and let's go back to where it started. And when I say where it started is everyone knows the playing field here, and you're going to extrapolate, of course, but the Americans and the Russians were in a space race. Kennedy said we were going to go to the moon, said we had to do it. We had this pressure on us to do it. We didn't have the technology to do it. Everybody knew that we were under the gun and that we were probably not going to be able to pull this off. Why don't we talk about some obvious questions for people out there? Here's a good one. For instance, so many people involved in NASA, so many people involved in the Apollo programs, how could they have faked it where those people would not have known about it and leaked the fact that it was fake?
Well, the interesting fact is that secrets that involve these much people can and actually have been covered up for many, many years. For example, the Soviet Union, they had this their own moon project, their own equivalent to the Apollo project. That was the N1 program, in which they built a Saturn-sized rocket called the N1. They tested it 4 times. It blew up 4 times. But anyways, that was covered up for about 30 years, okay, until the Soviet Union collapsed. They revealed that after the USSR collapsed. But the point is that program involved literally thousands, and I mean thousands of scientists and engineers and technicians, right? They all shut up about that for all these years. That was factually covered up all these years. And when you look at the Apollo program, it's pretty much basically the same thing. But also, most of these people probably wouldn't have needed to know about the hoax to begin with. For example, you see all those little guys sitting down at their computers, in Houston, right? Well, these guys just receive information from the tracking stations. Now, the tracking stations, right, I'm talking about the NASA Deep Space Network, i.e. Goldstone, Madrid, and also Parkes and Honeysuckle Creek and all those in Australia, right? All these, few people realize this, but all these stations, they're all owned by NASA. You see, these are not independent verification. In fact, the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, declared it illegal for any independent verification to reveal any communications not intended for public view, right? And anyways, these guys at the Deep Space Network, they're all owned by NASA, right? What they do is they simply allegedly receive this information from space, then they relay it over landlines to the guys at Houston, right, where they just read it off their computer screens. Now, the people at Houston, they don't need to know or care where the data comes from, so easily the guys at the tracking stations could just relay some prearranged tapes, over landlines and say, hey, this came from the moon. It's as simple as that, really. Okay.
So basically, and I'm going to jump to a call, but when we get calls where we would just patch them through, and I will preface this, Jarrah, so you know, we don't screen callers here, so it is as raw as it gets here. If somebody gets out of line with you, I'll take care of it, but my audience is usually very respectful of our guests here and their theories and opinions. So why don't we take a quick call before I want to get into some other questions about the Van Allen belt specifically. 734, you're on the air with Jarrah White. Can we get your first name and where you're calling from?
Yeah, hi, this is Chris from Detroit, Michigan.
Hey, Chris, how's it going tonight?
It's going pretty great. I've never heard the show before, but I'm liking it.
Good. Glad to have you. Newbie, we like that. And you have a question tonight for Mr. White?
Not so much a question, but just a general comment. First of all, I believe we landed on the moon. Most of the problem with conspiracy theories, especially a conspiracy theory like this, is that as soon as one thing is disproved, they find something new, and we can go on, and we can go on with this forever. I mean, we're talking about a person who his personal mentor on this conspiracy is Ralph Rene, who, among the other things that he believes, he claimed to have proved that Einstein's theory was not valid and that Newton's laws of universal gravitation was all wrong. So we're dealing with a person here that has an oversized ego.
Well, you're already kind of getting into a hearsay third-party thing, kind of at that point. So that's kind of a problem I have with your comment there. Let me ask you a quick question before you finish your comment, and I'll definitely let you finish, and then I'll let Jarrah, of course, have his say. Don't you think in 2009 that it wouldn't be very difficult for us to get quality, and I mean quality when I say visible pictures that you don't have to look at and say, ooh, that could be a rock or it could be a rover. Don't you think it's strange that we can't get quality pictures of the stuff that was left on the moon?
Sure. I haven't seen these pictures yet. I just found out about it when you guys were talking about it.
I mean, they don't anything like anything you would be able to tell is anything but a rock, if that. It looks like nothing. If you've ever seen any of the things that people try to point out in these pictures that are something else, like the face on Mars or something like that, this looks like absolutely nothing. So go ahead and finish your comment, though.
Well, my main question on this would be, fine, let's be willing to submit that both sides have an equal chance of being right.
Okay.
The question would be motive, all right? What's the motive here? Well, the motive is to beat the Soviet Union in the space race, right? So my question is, the Soviet Union would be the number one group to have a motive to disprove the moon landing. Don't you think that if there was a great amount of evidence that this guy could figure it out on his own somewhere in Australia, that the Soviet Union and all the Soviet space organizations and all that shit could have figured this out on their own a long time ago? I'm pretty sure it would have appeared on the front page.
Hey, you know what? I'm going to put you on hold for a second. I think that's a fantastic question. So let's leave the comment at the question, Jarrah. Can you answer that question for us?
Well, certainly. The Soviet Union is often presented as the ultimate independent verification for the moon landings, but the fact is, shortly after the moon landings, right, in fact, even before the moon landings, the U.S. had been selling the Soviet Union tons of American wheat. That was, sort of like how the U.S. does with China, and all the free trade deals. They were selling the Soviet Union all these wheat, all this tons of wheat. That was the price for silence, right? And nowadays, the Soviet Union, they're all working together with NASA and all the other space agencies, on the construction of the International Space Station, among other things, right? And if you really want to know just how soon the Soviet Union would have blown the whistle on the U.S., just read Two Sides of the Moon by Alexei Leonov. He was the Russian spacewalker, right? In his book, he claims to have been in Moscow at the time of the moon landing, right? And he claims that while he was in Moscow, he tracked the signals from the moon, directly from the moon, like during the touchdown and during the moonwalk videos that followed. Well, that's impossible because during the time of the moon landing, Moscow was on the far side of the Earth, the side facing away from the moon. Okay, you see the signals to receive something from space. You have to have the receiver in line of sight with the transmitter. Right? If you're not line in sight, then how do you get the data here? He claims he tracked it direct from the moon, yet he was on the far side of the Earth at the time. Right? So that shows just how soon the Russians would blow the whistle on the Americans.
Yeah, and I also think that possibly, and because he is a newbie to the show and has missed 100+ shows that discuss some of the cahoots that countries have been in on certain things, possibly. Who knows, at the end of the day, what the Russians knew and what they didn't know, as far as I'm concerned. But as far as blowing the lid, I think there's a lot more evidence that is a little bit more in your face. For instance, this gentleman didn't look at those photos, and he didn't have an answer for my question. I guess another question that I have, that I've always had, Jarrah, is it seems as though we went to the moon in the 60s, or we didn't, and then we stopped because apparently, well, I don't really have a good answer to this one. We stopped going because of either A, budgetary reasons, B, because it just wasn't interesting, which doesn't make any sense. There has to be some technical reasons why we can't go to the moon at all, according to the people who believe that we never went in the first place. So why don't we get into a little bit about the specific scientific reasons why you believe that it isn't technically possible, or it wasn't technically possible back then, for the astronauts to have even made it there alive and come back. Some of the specifics. Why don't we get into that a little bit, shall we?